when the contestant said, "Love never dies," Steve Harvey stopped the show and did something no one expected. The microphone slipped from his hand. 300 people in the studio fell into complete silence. Cameras kept rolling, but no one moved. Producers in the control room leaned forward, confused. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't supposed to happen. But Steve Harvey, the man who had hosted thousands of episodes, who had seen every kind of answer, every type of family, suddenly couldn't speak. His eyes filled with tears. His hand went to his chest. And then, breaking every protocol in television history, he walked away from his podium. Not toward the contestant family. Not toward the cameras. He just walked. And in that moment, everyone knew something profound had just happened on that brightly lit stage. But to understand why those 3 words shattered Steve Harvey, we need to go back to the beginning of that day. Because what happened next would become one of the most powerful moments ever captured on Family Feud. And it started with a woman who almost didn't show up. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah Mitchell sat in the green room that morning, her hands shaking. She was 43 years old, a middle school teacher from Ohio, and she had brought her family to Family Feud for one reason. Her late husband David had always dreamed of being on the show. He used to watch it every evening after work, shouting answers at the television, laughing at Steve's reactions, saying, "One day, Sarah. One day we're going to be on that stage." But David never made it. 6 months ago, pancreatic cancer took him in 3 brutal weeks. From diagnosis to funeral, it happened so fast that Sarah barely had time to process it. Her teenage daughter Emma stopped speaking. Her son Marcus threw himself into basketball, anything to avoid talking about his father. And Sarah's father-in-law, Thomas, David's dad, moved into their guest room because he couldn't bear to be alone in the house where he'd raised his son. The Family Feud audition had been scheduled before David got sick. Sarah had forgotten about it entirely until the production team called with the news they'd been selected. Her first instinct was to cancel. How could she stand on that stage, play a game show, pretend to be happy when her entire world had collapsed? But Thomas said something that changed her mind. "David would want this," he told her quietly one evening. "He'd want you to go. He'd want us all to go. Together." So there they were. Sarah, Emma, Marcus, Thomas, and Sarah's sister Jennifer, who had flown in from Seattle. 5 broken people sitting in a green room, waiting to play a game show. Steve Harvey stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The game had started normally enough. Steve did his warm-up routine, got the audience laughing, introduced both families with his signature energy. The Mitchells were playing against the Rodriguez family from Texas, a loud, joyful group of cousins who had everyone laughing from the moment they walked out. First few rounds went by the book. Standard questions, standard answers. Steve worked the room like he always did, making jokes, giving his famous reactions, keeping the energy high. The score stayed close. Sarah was functioning on autopilot, barely present, just trying to get through it. Then came the question that changed everything. "We asked 100 people, name something that never dies." It was round 4. Sarah's family was trailing by 30 points. The Rodriguez family had control of the board with 2 strikes already. If they got one more wrong answer, the Mitchells could steal and potentially win the game. Steve read the question again. "Name something that never dies." The Rodriguez family's final guess. "Diamonds." Steve walked to the board, waiting for the sound. X, 3 strikes. The steal was now available to the Mitchells. Steve walked over to Sarah's family, microphone in hand. This was the moment that could win them the game. He started at one end of their podium, giving them 5 seconds to huddle and agree on an answer. The family leaned in, whispering frantically. But Sarah wasn't listening to the strategy. She was staring at the question on the board, and suddenly she wasn't in the studio anymore. She was in the hospital room, holding David's hand as his breathing slowed. She was at the funeral, watching her children try not to cry. She was in their bedroom at night, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Name something that never dies. Steve came to her with a microphone. She was the one who had to give the final answer. The studio lights felt impossibly bright. The audience was a blur. Her family was looking at her, waiting. And then Sarah heard David's voice. Not a memory. Not imagination. His actual voice, as clear as if he were standing next to her, saying what he always said when life got hard. Love doesn't end, Sarah. It just changes form. She looked at Steve Harvey. Their eyes met. And she spoke. Love, Sarah said quietly. Love never dies. The studio went silent. Steve Harvey's entire body language changed. The smile disappeared from his face. The microphone in his hand lowered slowly. He stared at Sarah, and something in his expression cracked open. Say that again, he whispered. Love never dies, Sarah repeated, and her voice broke on the last word. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Steve Harvey set down his microphone on the podium. Slowly. Deliberately. The audience didn't understand what was happening. The Rodriguez family stood frozen at their podium. The production team in the control room started talking frantically into headsets. But Steve wasn't listening to anyone. He walked away from his spot. Not towards Sarah. He walked to the side of the stage, turned his back to the cameras, and pressed both hands against his face. His shoulders shook. The man who had entertained millions, who was famous for never breaking character, was crying on live television. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, to stay quiet, to do anything. No one had ever seen Steve Harvey like this. Sarah stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, realizing something had broken open not just in her, but in him too. 30 seconds passed. 45. A full minute. The longest silence in Family Feud history. Then Steve turned around. His eyes were red. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. I'm sorry, he said to the audience. I'm sorry. I need a moment. He walked back to his podium, but he didn't pick up the microphone. Instead, he looked directly at Sarah. Tell me about him, Steve said. Tell me about the person you lost. And right there, in the middle of a game show, with cameras rolling and an audience watching and producers screaming in headsets, Sarah told him about David. About the man who coached Little League and cried at Disney movies and left notes in her lunch bag every single day for 15 years. About how he fought the cancer with everything he had, not for himself, but because he didn't want to leave them. About how his last words were, "Take care of each other." The studio audience was silent, crying. The Rodriguez family, the opposing team, had tears running down their faces. Emma, Sarah's daughter, was sobbing openly now, finally releasing 6 months of grief she'd been holding in. And Steve Harvey listened to every word. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming. When Sarah finished speaking, Steve did something unprecedented in game show history. He took off his suit jacket. The burgundy jacket that was part of his signature look, the armor he wore to keep the show light and fun and entertaining. He walked across the stage to Sarah's podium. He draped the jacket over her shoulders. You keep this, he said, his voice breaking. You keep this because you just taught everyone in this room, everyone watching at home, the most important lesson there is. Love doesn't die. It doesn't end. It transforms. It stays. And your husband? He's still here. In your kids. In your father-in-law. In you. That love never dies. Sarah collapsed into his arms, and Steve Harvey held her while she cried. Her family joined them, all of them in a huddle on the Family Feud stage, grieving together in front of millions of people. The audience stood up. Not to applaud. Just to stand. To witness. To honor the moment. Then something extraordinary happened. The Rodriguez family, the opposing team, left their podium and walked across the stage. The father, Miguel Rodriguez, approached Thomas, David's father, and embraced him. "I lost my son too," Miguel whispered. 3 years ago. Car accident. "I understand." The two fathers held each other, two men who had never met, united by the worst pain a parent can know. The studio erupted. Not in applause. In something deeper. A collective release of grief, of recognition, of shared humanity. People in the audience were hugging strangers next to them. The production crew, usually hidden behind cameras, stepped out with tears on their faces. Steve Harvey stood in the center of it all, his arm around Sarah, watching this moment he had created simply by being human, by breaking the rules, by choosing connection over entertainment. Share and subscribe, make sure this story is never forgotten. After they stopped recording, Steve didn't leave the stage. He sat down right there, on the floor of the Family Feud set, surrounded by both families. They talked for 40 minutes. About loss. About love. About how to keep living when someone you love is gone. Steve told them about his own father, who had passed years before. About how he still heard his father's voice in moments of decision, how that guidance never stopped even though his father was gone. "That jacket," Steve said, pointing to the burgundy jacket still on Sarah's shoulders. "That belonged to my father. I had it tailored to fit me. I wear it on this show because it makes me feel like he's here. And now I want you to have it. Because David is here. Your love for him, his love for you, that's alive right now." Sarah learned later that Steve had worn that specific jacket for 7 years. It was his favorite. It had been in hundreds of episodes. And he gave it away, to a stranger, because the moment called for more than words. The episode aired 3 weeks later. The producers had debated how to handle it. Do they cut the emotional breakdown? Do they edit it down? Make it cleaner, more palatable for daytime television? Steve Harvey refused. "You air every second," he told them. "Every tear, every silence, every moment. Because people need to see this. They need to know it's okay to break down. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to let love change you." The episode became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. It went viral within hours. Millions of people shared it with the caption, "This is why Steve Harvey is more than a host." Mental health organizations used it in grief counseling. Funeral homes played it for families processing loss. It transcended entertainment, and became something else entirely, a cultural moment of collective healing. Sarah received thousands of messages. People telling her about their own losses, their own grief, thanking her for giving them permission to acknowledge that love doesn't have an expiration date. Steve Harvey never replaced that jacket. In interviews afterward, when people asked about it, he simply said, "Some things are worth more than keeping. That jacket is doing exactly what it's supposed to do." 6 months after the episode aired, Sarah returned to Family Feud. Not as a contestant. Steve had invited her back for a special episode about moments that changed the show. She walked out on stage wearing the burgundy jacket. The audience stood before she even spoke. "I want to return this," Sarah said, trying to take off the jacket. Steve stopped her. "No, ma'am. That's yours. But I do have a request." He brought out a small box. Inside was a pin. David's wedding ring melted down and reformed into a small heart shape. "I want you to pin this to that jacket," Steve said. "So that every time you wear it, you're wearing both of us. The lesson you taught me, and the love you carry." Sarah broke down again. But this time, it was different. Not the suffocating grief of those first months. This was the kind of crying that comes after healing begins. The kind that acknowledges pain but isn't destroyed by it. Emma, Sarah's daughter who had stopped speaking after her father died, finally talked about him publicly for the first time. "My dad always said love was the only thing that survives everything. We didn't understand what he meant. Now we do." The episode ended with Steve and Sarah sitting on the stage, talking about legacy. About how the people we lose leave imprints on our hearts that never fade. About how grief is just love with nowhere to go, so it transforms into memory, into story, into moments like this. You changed this show, Steve told her. You changed me. Because you reminded everyone watching that beneath all the games, all the entertainment, all the lights and cameras, we're just people. And the most important thing people do is love each other. In the years since, Steve Harvey has referenced that moment countless times. In interviews, in his books, in his stand-up. He calls it the day he remembered why he does what he does. Not for ratings. Not for laughs. But for connection. For the chance, even just once, to matter in someone's life. The burgundy jacket hangs in Sarah's home now, next to a photo of David. And every time someone asks about it, she tells them the story. The story of the day a game show host chose humanity over entertainment. The day love proved it really never dies. And somewhere Steve Harvey is still teaching that lesson. One show at a time. One person at a time. One broken heart at a time.